Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses here today.
The Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy is here also, Chief Giordano. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for being here. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you to our witnesses for testifying on this very important issue. I want to add my condolences to all of the families who lost loved ones in these very tragic accidents as well. One of those sailors was from Michigan, electronics technician, 3rd class, Kenneth Aaron Smith. Our prayers and thoughts are with him, with his family, as all of the sailors who lost their lives. Director Pendleton, I certainly appreciate your report and your testimony here today. And I just have kind of a straightforward question just to get some clarity as to priorities that we need to be thinking about in terms of hopefully avoiding more of these incidents in the future. And just a question, if you traded places with either of the gentlemen who are sitting next to you, the Chief of Naval Operations or the Secretary of the Navy, in your mind, what would be the first steps that you would take?
You know, I think our recommendations lay out a pretty good roadmap. We thought about this a lot back in 2015, specific to forward deployed naval forces. I think you got to make time for them to train. You got to make space in the schedule for them to actually train and get those certifications. Those are the trend, and that's what's concerning. The second, which I think the Navy's doing both these things now, is you need to assess whether or not increasing reliance on overseas-based ships is the best call, because that comes at cost, and some of them may be hidden. So those would be the two things that I would focus on specific to the Navy.
You mentioned in your opening testimony about a plan, the readiness plan, that we need to continue to demand that. Would you please elaborate on those comments?
So last year in 2016, we looked at the readiness rebuilding plans of all the military services, including the Navy, as well as how the Department of Defense was overseeing it. And we came away with the conclusion, not to put too fine a point on it, that they didn't have a comprehensive plan for how they were going to go forward. There's a lot of recognition of the problem, a lot of priority being assigned to it, but what we couldn't see was, if you put money in, how much readiness were you going to get out? And also, there was the question of how you're going to manage the demands. So what we suggested, hopefully, was practical. What are your goals? In some cases, the goals weren't clear to us. You know, how much are you going to be able to get next year and the year after? What's it going to cost? How long is it going to take? Those kinds of things. Because our concern was we would look up in 5 years and be in the same situation.
The concern that was expressed by Senator Ernst and I last year, in fact, we sent a letter to Secretary Mabus, concerned with individuals in the Navy's dependence on electronic devices for navigation. I know we don't know the reason for these incidents and the accidents, but sometimes over-reliance on electronics can lead to some problems. And when you think about the warfare of the future, conflict in space, we could have GPS systems could be compromised, communication systems could be compromised, all sorts of issues could be related to that. And there's a sense that we need to make sure that we're training our sailors in good old-fashioned seamanship, which means navigating the old-fashioned way with charts and other types of navigational aids that were done before electronics, and make sure that there are eyeballs out to the sea at all times, not just relying on the electronics. Secretary Spencer and Admiral, if you could comment as to how are we ensuring that our sailors continue to have their seamanship abilities and not relying on electronics, and particularly my understanding is that ships with certified electronic navigation systems are not even required to have charts on board. Is that something that we're looking at?
Senator, it's a great question. I was heartened the other day when I was down at the Naval Academy, and Admiral Carter did what he should do in his command to put the arm on me to find some more money for the Academy, but he was talking specifically about the training that goes on with the yard boats, the PYs, I believe they're called, YPs, thank you. The yard boats, where they actually, midshipmen go out and actually practice shipmanship in the reality along with celestial navigation. We need to fund these things on a continual basis. It's easy to say these are things of the past, why can't we kick them to the curb? But you bring up some very salient points about what happens when we're denied access to certain technologies. That being said, I certainly don't want to shortchange the advances that we get from technology. Being a pilot, we're now bringing iPads into cockpits and doing away with paper charts. There are risks there, but I believe what the FAA has even come to the conclusion is the technology benefits outweigh the risks.
Sir, if I could just pile on to that, it is really about reliability. And so if we are going to shift to an electronic, system, electronic-based system, if you will, part of that reliability is making sure that the operators understand the underlying principles of that display that they're getting, and they are ready to question the validity of that display when things don't look right. To understand whether it looks right or not, you got to have the fundamental training in relative motion, navigation, et cetera. And so it's extremely important to make sure that we've got that in place. As the Secretary pointed out, we're instilling that at the Naval Academy. It'll be part of our comprehensive review to make sure that we're continuing that in the officer and enlisted development programs.
Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and to the family members, friends, and fellow sailors, I offer my condolences. Admiral Richardson, Senator Cotton mentioned something I think is very important. He said you're going through the investigation to get into the root causes of the incidents we're discussing today. But he made a very important point that I doubt seriously gets covered, and Director Pendleton, this may be something for you as well, and that's really actions or inaction by Congress that are some of the root causes to these problems. Does that ever really weigh into any of the investigations? In other words,
well, and because I don't want to minimize any
up to the circumstances that happened on that ship, but it wasn't necessarily. It could have been something that could have been avoided if funding, if we'd done our job right. Does that ever weigh into any of these investigations, or is that something that the GAO would ever look at?
Probably not in a micro sense like that, but I will say that I think the way that plays out actually is in making choices of short-term versus long-term plans. Mm-hmm. If you look in our statement that we provided for the record, we show the Navy's plan to build ships kind of goes that way, and its personnel plan goes that way.
Right.
That's a straight out-year budget projection problem, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to figure out how to squeeze a lot of military into a can that's not quite as big as they'd like it to be. And so you see these kind of mismatches happen. Mm-hmm. On the micro, not so much. It's usually hard to suss that out, honestly.
Well, I think what we have to do is maybe take it up a notch and look at trend, because the trends you're talking about in terms of personnel and investments and ships and naval capabilities are a direct result of what we either do or do not do up here. And I think sooner or later we've got to start demonstrating that some of Admiral Richardson's always here to say he's going to get the job done. But at some point, because that balloon burst, you simply can't get the job done. Admiral Richardson, I do have some other questions that I'd like to get to fairly quickly.
Sir, our investigations really concentrate on what is within our span of control. We get the resources that you give us, and it's our responsibility and the responsibility of command to take those resources and operate safe and effectively.
I expected the answer to that at the level you're dealing with the incident, but we really have to get Congress to be more aware of how our actions or inactions are a root cause to some of these problems. I want to ask some questions. We're going to submit several probably questions for the record in my capacity as the Personnel Subcommittee Chair, but I want to go back maybe and ask the question. You know, being a captain or for a cruiser or destroyer, I think, is a relatively complex job. Would you agree with that, Admiral Richardson?
Yes, sir.
Now, I think that Chair McCain mentioned his concern with maybe we're getting more breadth and not enough depth as we're training up men and women to fill these roles. And one question that I have, if you have the average assignment length for a CO on each of these ships to be 1.8 years and a commander to be 18 months, are we kind of tightening the length of time that we're actually giving these people an opportunity to get that depth of experience before they're put in a command role? And do you think that that's an okay thing or something that we should look at?
Well, we need to make sure that we got an adequate sea time, right? Really, time on the ship, operating not only in command but throughout their career, so that by the time they get to command, they've got the experience and training required to have those instincts that will serve them so well in command. And so that pipeline is a part of this comprehensive review. To be honest, sir, we look at that constantly. It's not like we're waking up, from a long sleep here, but we need to give it a fresh look as part of the comprehensive review.
But if you've got an XO and a CO on the same ship and sequential assignments, and then you're overlapping some of that, how does that help?
I'm not sure it does. So this is a question that, a specific question that I have. This XO-CO fleet up plan that we've put in place for the Surface Navy, I want to make sure we examine that closely.
One other quick question, and as I said, I've got a number that I'm going to submit for the record, but do we have a surface warfare community retention problem?
There's nothing really that's been brought to my attention for the community writ large. The exception would be nuclear-trained surface officers. That's a community under particular pressure that we watch very closely.
It looked like the Center for Naval Analysis suggested that the demand may be outweighing the supply, so I was just trying to get to the root cause of why that is and whether or not retention was a part of it. My time has expired. We'll submit a number of questions for the record. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, could I provide one more answer? Would that be possible? Senator, addressing your question about staffing on the bridge, et cetera, and career advancement, one of the things you're going to see coming out of my study is exactly that. We're going to look at DOPMA. We're going to look at joint service. We're going to look at any and all aspects at the higher level, and that addresses exactly what you're talking about.
Senator King.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While in no way denigrating all the discussion that we've had today about staffing and training and adequacy and hours of work, I think all those are contributors, but I'm surprised. I want to turn to an entirely different subject. Every boat in the Gulf of Maine has a radar on it that tells us when there's another boat within a mile or 2 miles or 5 miles, an alarm goes off, it shows up on your GPS. How in the world does a billion-dollar destroyer not know that there's a freighter closing in on it? I don't understand how this could possibly happen. And I've talked to Maine lobstermen. They're scratching their heads. They can tell when there's a flock of seagulls off their bow.
Sir, got the same questions. It's very hard to understand with the sophisticated systems on board these warships that we let a ship get in that close to the point of collision. And so that is a direct
Not a
focus
ship,
of-
3 ships. 3 of these were collision with
Right.
merchant vessels.
Yes, sir.
I mean, aren't there, can you give me an answer specifically? Aren't there radar systems
are,
on
yes,
these
sir.
ships that
There's
would
a
detect
primary-
anything within the range?
There's a primary and a backup radar that should detect those ships. There are systems that can alert you at a particular range, and so we have to find out what happened.
Is there a black box on these ships like there is on an aircraft so we can determine what the sequence of events was?
We'll get to the sequence of events, yes, sir.
And the second question is, don't we have sailors on the bridge with
We
binoculars
do.
anymore?
It's required to have lookouts, and we have lookouts on the watch team on the bridge.
Is there, and the other question is about the radar of the ships that ran into us. Is there some technology that they couldn't see us? Are we using a stealth technology? Anything you can answer in an open setting?
Sure. I mean, it's wouldn't surprise anybody, I think, that we design our warships to have a lower radar cross-section. I mean, it's some designed to be very low, right? So that degree of stealth makes us more effective from a warfighting standpoint. But that also imposes a burden, if you will, on the crew of that ship to understand that they are low observable and that they may not be as easily seen as something that is as large as a destroyer. It'll have a radar cross-section of a ship that's much smaller.
Or if they're not in a conflict situation, to emit some kind of signal to
That's
another.
been an immediate action, is that there is this automatic identification system, AIS, that the Secretary mentioned, and we had, I think, a distorted perception of operational security that we kept that system off in on our warships. One of the immediate actions following these incidents is that, particularly in heavily trafficked areas,
Trafficked areas like
we're just going to turn it on. I mean,
like
you can-
Japan.
Right, you can look outside and see the ship, and so It's not an operational security standpoint.
So you can't report to us today any results of investigation into what happened with the non-performance of the radar system?
Those specifics are forthcoming.
Forthcoming soon?
As soon as the investigations are complete, yes, sir.
All right, let me turn from this subject for a moment to maintenance. I think the testimony from our friend from the GAO was that the maintenance capacity is not adequate and that therefore we have ships that are in port too long, and that puts a strain on the ships that are left at sea. Is that accurate?
I think Mr. Pendleton painted that exact picture. The words he used were vicious cycle, and I would agree that's a good characteristic of that.
Because these ships are expensive, as you know, and anytime you have a capital object that's expensive, Secretary Spencer, you know from your business experience, you want it operating. Do we need to be talking about increasing the capacity of the maintenance yards to cut down on that time off the ocean, if you will?
I'll go first. I think that there's no doubt that we could use increased maintenance capacity. Right now, we are leveraging every ounce of capacity, I think, across the nation, both public and private, to execute the maintenance that we need.
But if we're executing on every ounce of capacity and it's not adequate, sounds to me like we need more
We
capacity.
need more, yes, sir.
And is that in the plans anywhere? Is that in any submissions of budgetary priorities in the future?
Well, one of the other reports that Mr. Pendleton just recently issued was a report on our shipyards, and so how to increase the capacity through modernizing our shipyards. We work closely with the private sector to have these discussions all the time in terms of how do we increase that capacity. So it's something that has our attention, yes, sir.
One final question on the technology. I would urge that a standard practice ought to be for these locational radar that keep an eye on what's in the vicinity, that if there should be an alarm, which I'm sure there is, and B, it should ring in the captain's quarters if anything comes within whatever the set distance is. It's really unacceptable in this day and age with the technology that we have to have something like this happen, regardless of the wider issues.
Now,
this is just unacceptable from a modern seamanship point of view, it seems to me.
Sir, I agree with you 100%, and that's why I'm fighting the tendency to characterize this. I mean, certainly there are tearing down forces that are broader. We've discussed many of those today, but this will go to, proper operation of your equipment, fundamentals of watch standing. Those are the things that we have to look at.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On behalf of the chairman, let me recognize Senator Donnelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to join my colleagues in expressing my deepest condolences to the family and friends of the sailors we have lost in these incidents. We are grateful for the service, saddened by the loss. Extraordinary people. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for convening this hearing. Both our military leadership and Congress have roles to play to ensure this doesn't happen again. Admiral, I just want to follow up on my colleague Senator King's questions. And you mentioned that we'll get to the sequence of events and find out what happened. Do you have a time frame for that? Because we saw a number of incidents, and the goal is the faster we want to do it right, but the faster we get the facts as to what happened, the better the opportunity is to not have it happen again.
Right, Senator, we're taking sort of a response along two time scales, if you will, sir. So we want to get the full investigation done with alacrity, and we are doing that. And so this fall, a time frame, we'll get those complete. But we're not waiting for those things to be done to act. And so there are a number of tactical immediate actions. I mentioned the automatic identification system. We're going to turn that on so that we're much more visible to other ships. Mandating that we perform both manual and electronic tracking of all other vessels that will come within 2.5 miles. We've got mandated commanding officer review and approval of the watch bills, the watch teams that will be doing that. So there's a number of actions, my point being that we are doing now to enhance the things that Senator King and you were talking about.
How many radar systems do you have on at a time? And are there backups for every
For navigation and safety, 2 radar systems, a primary and a backup. And then there may be a third commercial radar that we use sometimes.
Were they working at the time of these incidents on both ships?
Sir, I don't have those details, so we'll get to that.
Mr. Pendleton, in your statement, you identify a number of recommendations from past GAO reviews that the Navy has not yet implemented. Which do you consider the most urgent of those?
I think with respect to the forward deployed naval forces, I think carving out dedicated training time for them is going to be very important. So that's probably my number one. When you look broader than that and begin to give a urgent, not necessarily since it needs to be done today, but the Navy needs to determine how many people it really needs and put on the ships, because 100-hour work weeks are not sustainable. So those would be the two I identify for you. Longer term, I think the shipyards are going to be a real issue. We just issued the report that was mentioned. There needs to be a capital investment plan on the shipyards. We're going to run out of dry dock space, and it's going to be hard to get out of this vicious cycle, sir.
Secretary Spencer, what do you look at as the most urgent things to implement right now?
I concur with training, but when I put on my Title X hat, we have to gear up on infrastructure. If we look at the maintenance cycles that we have here, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Pendleton, our bill is $4.2 billion.
I think it's actually 4.86.
$4.86 billion to get our yards back in shape. We're going to have to do something to move that ball down the road.
Thank you. Admiral, as has been mentioned, 100-hour work weeks are unsustainable. I know you have personal experience from your deployments that you've had. What are we doing right now to change that paradigm of 100-hour work weeks and helping those individuals who are shouldering that burden right now, who are out in the field doing the very, very best they can to keep our nation safe?
So now all the surface force, the submarine force, and the aviators all have mandatory sleep requirements now in place. The surface force just recently made that mandatory. It was recommended before. So that will that will mandate that at sea in those watch rotations that we get sufficient sleep and get out of this cycle. The other thing is there is a cultural factor here where you've got, it's just a little bit more you're more dedicated, if you will, if you can go the extra mile and stay awake. That's like pulling an all-nighter in college. I have two daughters in college, and it's too common there as well. And so it's a combination of education and culture change to make sure that people are seeking this rest.
And the last thing I want to ask is, as you do these investigations, very often, as I know you're aware of, the people who know the best as to how to fix it are the ones who are in the front line and who are right there on the ships or in the submarines. And I want to know what we're doing to make sure we incorporate their ideas in how we move forward.
Yes, sir. It started with the operational pause. In my message for that, I mandated that those be small groups, of sailors on the deck plate. Focus groups, I think, is the most effective way that I've seen to get after those types of concerns. Beats a poll or a survey or anything like that. And so that'll be a fundamental part of our way going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Chairman McCain, Senator Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And gentlemen, thank you for being here and your testimony. I also want to offer my condolences to the families. And, this is just completely unacceptable, period. No debate about that. I don't think anyone's debating that. But it's, when the men and women of our military do what less than 1% of Americans do in this country, which is raise their right hand to support and defend the Constitution and keep us safe, we got to do a better job, all of us, the Navy, the Marines, the Army, the Congress, and it's unacceptable. So, Admiral, I want you to, I'm having a hard time with this issue of kind of put us on the bridge of a modern Navy ship and talk about the redundancies, the radar, the GPSs, the physical watch. I know you're investigating this, but what does that look like? Aren't we the most advanced Navy in the history of the world? And how are these kind of redundancies in terms of basic seamanship and collisions at sea breaking down in your view? And it's not just one, sailor on the watch. There's a whole host of other things that would make sure we avoid these kind of collisions. What in your experience, first, what does that look like? And then what in your experience do you think is going wrong, where obviously there's a series of failures here in these collisions, not just one? What does that look like, and how can we better understand it?
Right. Sir, my experience is just as yours, that these catastrophes really result from the accumulation of a number of small errors that build up and line up eventually to create a sequence that results in an incident of this magnitude. To put you on the bridge of a modern destroyer, the watch team will be on the order of 10 people. About 4 of those will be officers, the officer of the deck, the junior officer of the deck, officer of the watch, conning officer. There'll be 2 lookouts. There'll be a quartermaster. And so there's plenty of people involved in this seamanship and navigation on the bridge. They're supported by a team in the Combat Information Center, which is also looking at electronic displays. They don't have windows, but they're backing them up. With respect to the technology, the equipment for all of those critical systems, navigation, steering, propulsion, we have a primary and a backup system for every one of those. So GPS is backed up by inertial navigators. We have a primary and a backup radar. For the rudders, we have 2 rudders, and each of those rudders has a primary and a backup hydraulic cylinder. And so there's a lot of redundancy built into these systems because they are so fundamental to safety. And so now you get a sense, and it goes back to Senator Donnelly's question and Senator King's point, which is how could all of that break down so catastrophically to result in a collision of this magnitude? And that's why we have to do the thorough investigation.
Let me ask another question. It comes to readiness, it comes to training. One of the things in my relatively short time here in the Senate that I've been concerned about with regard to military readiness is that this committee, this Congress, well-intentioned, puts additional training requirements, additional things that you need to address. Because we told you, and to be honest, most of those don't relate to combat readiness. Most of them don't relate to basic MOS, whether it's a surface warfare officer or a Marine infantry officer and his, duty to close with and destroy the enemy of our nation. How much of your training do you believe is being mandated by the Congress that takes you away from your basic MOS training? And if there are issues with that, we would certainly like to know about it. Mr. Secretary, can you try to address
Senator, let me address that for you.
You think it's a problem?
It definitely is a problem. Not only will you hear from my report group as to any actions done at the Senate level or need to be adjusted here in this chamber or other chambers, you're going to hear from them. We're going to address DOPMA. We're going to address the Inouye Amendment. We're going to address how Joint Chiefs task. We have given this committee an infinite reign, literally, to address everything. At the operational level, the Secretariat, the OPNAV, the CMC are all going through their instructions going, what are we focused on? We're focused on readiness and lethality. What do all our instructions support? And if we find instructions that are not focusing us on those 2 items, we're going to bring them to your attention if you have control of them. If we have control of them, we're going to try to adjust this. It's as I said earlier, the rucksack issue. All the best intentioned in the world, put a rock in to do a training on smoking cessation, put a rock in to do other sorts of training. No one's taking a rock out, and the rucksack's getting pretty damn heavy.
Well, I couldn't agree more, and Admiral, I'm assuming you would agree with that, but I implore you to bring those issues back to us because there's only so many hours in a day. And the mission of the Navy, you know what that mission is, and we need to make sure our sailors are trained in the best way possible. In this rucksack issue you're talking about, as a reservist myself, in the reserves it's even worse, because there's less time in a year to train. So please bring those back. And again, my condolences to the families here. We need to fix this. And I know you're committed to doing it. It's going to be all-hands-on-deck effort, but we cannot afford to lose any more of our nation's finest in training accidents. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the chairman, Senator Blumenthal, please.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Thank you all for being here today on a very difficult subject, especially for any of us from Connecticut. We lost two brave, courageous men, one on the Fitzgerald, the other on the McCain. I'd like to pay tribute to electronics technician, second class, Dustin Doyen, and sonar technician, third class, Nak Chun Win, both from Connecticut. Their families mourn them, and all of us in Connecticut are struck by the sadness and grief of their passing and their courage in joining in devoting their lives to the defense of our nation. And so we really owe them an investigation that's not only thorough and comprehensive, but also as prompt as possible. I am struck by a number of the questions and answers that have been elicited so far in dealing with this intensely human tragedy in such an abstract way, which maybe makes it easier to address. But I think most Americans find these crashes incomprehensible. So let me begin by asking you, Admiral, is there any indication so far that there was equipment failure on either the Fitzgerald or the McCain?
So we're taking a look at all of that, and that'll be part of the investigative results when we come out. It's premature to say conclusively whether that contributed, but it's not only the operating status of the equipment, but how it was operated. Was it being operated properly in accordance with the procedures? You know, all of these things will be part of the results of that investigative look. Sir, I do also have to comment on how absolutely human this is to us. Every one of those sailors is like a son to me. And the opportunity to be with their families when they see them come back in these coffins, it makes it intensely human. And so we're going to get after this.
By the way, I did not mean to imply that anybody on this panel, and particularly you, Admiral, who has devoted your life to the Navy and service and sacrifice, would feel anything but the most intense pain and grief as a result. And having a son who has served in the Navy, another in the Marine Corps, I know that as a dad, I felt proud of the fact not only that they were serving, but that they were surrounded by people who really cared for them, and they were the best trained and the most dedicated of any military force in the history of the world. And yet, human error, as you've just pointed out, even with the best equipment, may result in failure to operate the equipment properly, which comes back to training. I have been told that since 2006, the Navy doubled the number of ships home-ported overseas to 20, obviously to increase its forward presence and reduce crisis response time, but training was eliminated on these forward deployed platforms. As a result, the number of expired certifications increased fivefold, from 7% to 37% between 2015 and 2017. Are those numbers accurate? I don't know whether they've been raised here before.
Yeah, most of that's coming from our work. The increase in overseas-based ships, I think, went from 20 to 40, which was about 7% of the Navy, to 14% of the Navy. The certification numbers that you described, that is from 2015 January until mid this year. If you imagine the 11 ships that are based in Japan, we looked at all the certification areas, 22 of them. When we looked at that in 2015, and you imagine a bunch of little squares, 7% of those were red. When we came back in preparation for this hearing, 37% of them were expired, some of them 2 years or more. And so that was a trend that we alerted the Navy to and that we put in our updated work. For the most part, you have it right, but just want to make sure the specifics were. With respect to training, what we said is they didn't have dedicated training time, unlike the ships based in the United States. So before a ship deploys from the United States, it has a train-up period. The folks overseas were pretty much just almost always deployed. Is that fair?
In terms of what those numbers mean, 37% of those certifications were expired.
Yeah.
And that means that.
That means, yes, I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, sorry.
There's a
What does it mean?
periodicity to this. Every couple of years or less, you have to be certified that you can do things, drive the ship, work your comms, everything, and then warfare areas as well. So that means that they had missed that certification time.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that they were not competent to perform duties that they were doing, but it does reflect on the kind of training that was.
And the trend was of concern, as I think the admirals mentioned as well.
And I would just articulate that if that certification has meaning, then we got to do the damn certification. And we can't just walk by it and try and talk our way out that, hey, we're still proficient, even though the cert's expired. That's just not an acceptable way to do business.
Well, not acceptable, I agree, 37%, and going from 7% to 37% in just 2 years is pretty
Egregious.
staggering. Thank you.
Senator Sullivan wants to have another.
Just two quick ones, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Wow.
And it was really a follow-up to Senator Blumenthal's question, which was the home port versus the overseas ported versus kind of CONUS home ported ship. The statistics that were just read, I think, are pretty striking. And Admiral and Mr. Secretary, I know you're going to be looking at the specifics of these accidents and what specifically happened, but I think if you could also help address kind of the strategic elements, is there something that we should be looking at that makes the overseas ported ships that are based overseas going through different training, different deployment cycles? If you can help address that issue too, because it does seem like that's something that might be an element of this challenge. Do you agree with that?
Yes, Senator. Two things that have readily come out of this, as far as I'm concerned, and Mr. Pendleton hit on metrics. I'm a true believer in metrics. We have to know what we're measuring and what we're looking at. And this is a prime example of, can we get ourselves a dashboard that is very easy for quote-unquote management to look at the dashboard and have the appropriate indicators on there at any one time. This is what we need to do. We don't need to actually be having our hands and fingers into what's going on there. We have to have the first indicators on when to react and say, uh-oh, trending in the wrong position, let's address. If you look at the study that I have asked to be stood up, we are addressing the overall root causes of what's going on. The CNO is looking at tactical causes. We are going to be looking at root causes. We've asked people from BP North America to join us. They lived through the Deepwater Horizon tragedy and came out the other side with a very strong plan. We called the Maritime Academy and said, who is your poster child for maritime safety who's had an issue? And they said, speak to Crowley Marine. They had a bit of a rash. They have a great program now called Road to Zero. Called Tom Crowley. He said, you're on it. We looked at other situations that were out there. We called the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinic has done 7 years of studies looking at high-pressure, team-oriented places. And what they were looking at were operating rooms where you had professionals, 7 different teams of professionals doing a lung transplant over a 7-hour period. And they degraded the whole thing, started over again, and said, how do we build for optimum outcome? And it came to such human behavior aspects as the anesthesiologist can go, need a minute here, everyone stop, I need to stabilize something, and had input and control into a situation of pressure and intensity that had one leader, but they had to actually culturally realign how they communicate with everyone. These are the kind of insights and people we're going to have working on our level to really see if we will have a plan to do corrective action.
Great, thank you.
Sir, if I could pile on, there is a real benefit to having ships forward deployed.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Don't
we
get me
need to-
wrong. I think it's actually critical that we have ships forward deployed.
And so, for a number of reasons that you're aware of, what we do need to do when we forward deploy ships, though, to Mr. Pendleton's point, is we need to have a comprehensive understanding of what it takes to sustain that forward deployed force from a maintenance, training, infrastructure standpoint, people, the whole thing.
Yes, and that's just what I'm requesting. Take a look at that issue as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, let me just add, Admiral, I appreciate everything you're saying, but it doesn't take a study or RAND or Mayo when you're making people work 100 hours a week, okay? It doesn't take any study. I don't have to ask RAND to look at it. I think I know what 100 hours a week does to people over time, and that's been standard procedure for a long time. Why not declare a halt to it right now? Right now, they should not be working 100 hours a week. So I appreciate all our plans and all our remedies, but there's some of them that are just common sense that don't require a study. So I think the men and women who are serving in the Navy would like to see some immediate action taken. 7-month deployments are a long time. Up till now, there have been times where those deployments have been a lot longer than that. Who is looking out for them? Who's asking them to stay in? So I appreciate all the studies you've ordered and all the assessments and all that. There's some that all you have to do is use common sense and make some changes that would obviously relieve some of the strain. When somebody's working 100 hours a week, over a period of time, they're going to make mistakes. Any manager can tell you that. So, Mr. Secretary, I'm glad you have all these plans. I'm glad you're going to make changes. I'm glad you've got Rand and whoever the hell else it is that's studying it. There are some aspects of what we're subjecting the men and women who are serving, especially in the overseas deployment ports, that you could change. You could make the change tomorrow. And what we would like to see is some significant changes. Fire a few people, that's fine, but I'm not sure it relieves that individual who is still working 100 hours a week. And one of the reasons why that person is working 100 hours a week, obviously, is because the enormous burden that have been placed on them, not only to do their job, but also a lot of additional requirements that every time there's been a problem, well, let's give another lecture, let's have another training session, let's have another test. So, again, I appreciate what you're saying, I appreciate what you're doing, but I'd also like to see some immediate common sense actions taken that anybody, any manager, any leader will tell you that if you work somebody over 100 hours a week, you're not going to get an efficient output. And there's many other aspects that are doing. If you keep deploying ships more than 7 months a year, you're not going to keep good people in the Navy. You're just not. They prefer a better life. And so, and finally, speak truth to power. One of the reasons why you are having to impose these burdens and the extended deployments and the lack of readiness is because of sequestration. When you don't know as you mentioned, when you don't know in September what you're going to be doing in October, that's not right and it's not fair. So, and Admiral Richardson, I'd like to thank you for your very frank and candid comments on that issue before this committee. So, I'd just like to finally say there are additional family members who are here, and I recognized a group of them at the beginning, but I'd also like to thank them again, those who were not here at the beginning of the hearing. We thank you for your family service and sacrifice. They will always be remembered, and your presence here renews and invigorates this committee's commitment to making sure that every single life of every single member of the United States Navy will be given the utmost protection and the utmost care and concern, and not allow situations to evolve that then make it likely that their lives are in greater danger. I thank the witnesses. I ask Senator Reid if he has any additional comments.
Mr. Chairman, I would simply join you in expressing profound condolences to the families and also a profound commitment on behalf of the Congress, and I know the Secretary and the CNO, to take the steps necessary to protect our men and women who wear the uniform of the United States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Hearing is adjourned.